Hello, this is Quantitative Research Design, Experimental, Non-Experimental by Carlos Hernandez. Okay, before we start, one thing to keep in mind is the subjects are the people being studied. Okay, let's start off with experimental research. Experimental research is able to manipulate the predictor variable and subjects to identify a cause and effect relationship. With experimental research, this is usually done in a lab. Experimental, the one being manipulated, while the other group is placed in a placebo group, which is non-manipulated group. In a lab control group, there is a high level of control and reliability. They are capable of performing experiments on people and manipulating the predictor variables. As a reminder, in experimental research, the characteristics are manipulation, control, and randomization. Now we'll be going to non-experimental research. Non-experimental research is a study when a researcher cannot control, manipulate, or alter the predictor variables or subjects. Instead, it relies on interpretations, observations, or interactions to come to a conclusion. Typically, this means the non-experimental researcher must rely on correlation, survey, or case studies and cannot demonstrate a true cause and effect relationship. Non-experimental research tends to have a high level of external validity, meaning it can be generalized to a larger population and are forced to observe and interpret what they are looking at. Being able to manipulate and control something leads to the next big difference in experimental research. The ability to find a cause and effect relationship. It's like saying X causes Y in the science and research world. But with non-experimental researchers cannot say with absolute certainty that X leads to Y. This is because there may be something it did not observe. An example would be, let's say we are curious about how violent men and women are. We cannot have a true experimental study because our predictor variable for violence is gender. To have a true experimental study, we would need to be able to manipulate the predictor variable. If we had a way to switch men into women and women into men back and forth so that we could see which gender is more violent, then we could run a true experimental study. But we can't do that, so our little experiment becomes non-experimental because we cannot manipulate our predictor variable. There is only disadvantages to non-experimental research. It cannot find cause and effect relationship and cannot manipulate predictor variables. But with experimental research, researchers have complete control over the extraneous variables. Furthermore, with experimental research, researchers can predict confidently that the observed effect on the dependent variable is only due to the manipulation of the independent variable. Here's a recap. With experimental research, the one that's being manipulated can identify cause and effect and can control, randomize, and can predict confidently. Remember, with non-experimental research, researchers cannot control, manipulate, or alter predictor variables and cannot identify cause and effect and must rely on correlation, surveys, and case studies. This concludes my presentation with experimental and non-experimental research. Thanks for watching.
Created using Powtoon.